As you get close to the exam, the biggest risk is not usually that you never learned the material, but that your attention gets scattered and your recall becomes unreliable under pressure. This is the point where some learners try to cram everything again from the beginning, which feels productive but often produces fatigue and anxiety instead of stronger memory. A final review should feel like tightening bolts, not rebuilding the machine, because your goal is to make what you already know easier to access quickly and accurately. Focus, retrieval cues, and confidence calibration are the three skills that make that possible, and they matter because the exam is a performance environment, not a reading environment. When you are performing, you need clean recall pathways, stable decision habits, and enough confidence to choose an answer without spiraling into doubt. Over the next stretch, the aim is to make your mind quieter, your recall faster, and your decisions more consistent. Before we continue, a quick note. This audio course is a companion to our course companion books. The first book is about the exam and provides detailed information on how to pass it best. The second book is a Kindle-only ebook that contains 1,000 flashcards that can be used on your mobile device or Kindle. Check them both out at cyber.author.me in the Bare Metal Study Guide series. A focused final review starts by narrowing your attention to the material that will most improve your score, not the material that feels most comfortable to revisit. Comfort is a misleading guide because your brain enjoys rereading things you recognize, but recognition is not the same as recall. Focus means you deliberately choose what to review based on where you are weakest, where mistakes keep repeating, and where confusion still shows up when you try to explain concepts out loud. It also means you stop feeding your mind constant new inputs, because new inputs consume attention and can disturb the structure you already built. In practice, focused review is about protecting mental bandwidth and using it where it pays off the most. When you commit to focus, you reduce the temptation to jump between topics impulsively, and that steadiness makes your review sessions shorter, calmer, and more effective. A steady mind learns better than a frantic mind, especially right before a test. One of the simplest ways to keep focus is to make your review driven by questions instead of driven by pages. When you approach a topic, you should be able to ask yourself what it is, why it matters, how it works at a high level, and what mistakes a beginner commonly makes with it. If you cannot answer those questions cleanly, you found a gap worth your time. If you can answer them, you have no need to reread large sections, because that would be activity without outcome. This question-first approach turns your review into a diagnostic process rather than a comfort routine, and it naturally prioritizes what needs attention. It also builds the exact skill the exam measures, which is being able to retrieve and apply knowledge, not simply recognize terms on a page. Over time, questions become mental hooks that pull the right concept into place quickly. That speed is what reduces stress during the exam, because you are not hunting around in memory while the clock keeps moving. Retrieval cues are the second piece, and they are best understood as deliberate triggers you build so your brain can find the right idea fast. A cue is not a full explanation, and it is not a paragraph you memorize. It is a small, reliable prompt that points to a larger concept you already understand. Think of a cue as the label on a file folder rather than the documents inside the folder, because the label helps you find the folder quickly, and then you can pull out the full idea. Good cues are personal, consistent, and tied to meaning, not tied to random wording. For example, a cue might be a short phrase that reminds you of the difference between policy and procedure, or a reminder that controls can be preventive, detective, or corrective, or a prompt that ties risk to likelihood and impact. The cue should make your brain snap to the correct framework without effort. When cues are strong, recall becomes less fragile, and fragile recall is what creates panic. A powerful way to build retrieval cues is to connect each concept to a simple contrast, because contrast reduces confusion and speeds up decision-making. Many exam questions are designed to test whether you can distinguish between close ideas, such as a capability versus a tool, an exception versus a workaround, or an outcome metric versus an activity metric. When you create a cue around the contrast, you are training your mind to notice the difference quickly. The goal is not to memorize clever slogans, but to build a dependable mental pathway that says when you see this kind of wording, you should think in this kind of distinction. This also helps prevent overthinking because you have a clear decision filter. If you find yourself stuck between two answers that both sound plausible, It is often because you lost the contrast and started thinking in vague generalities. A contrast cue pulls you back into precision, and precision is what eliminates the feeling of guessing. Over time, these cues make the exam feel more predictable because patterns begin to stand out. Another way to strengthen retrieval cues is to practice explaining concepts in your own words, as if you were teaching them to a brand new learner. Teaching style recall forces you to organize ideas, and organization is what makes memory reliable. When you can explain what a concept is, why it matters, and how it connects to related ideas, you are building multiple pathways to the same memory, which makes it easier to retrieve under stress. This is especially useful for governance topics because they can feel abstract until you connect them to real organizational behavior. For example, if you can explain why ownership prevents drift, why milestones prevent endless projects, and why reviews create learning loops, you are no longer holding isolated definitions. You are holding a connected system, and connected systems are easier to remember than scattered facts. This method also reveals where your understanding is thin, because thin understanding shows up as vague language and circular explanations. When you hear yourself getting vague, you know exactly what to revisit. Confidence calibration is the third piece, and it is the skill of matching how confident you feel to how correct you actually are. Many learners either undertrust themselves and change correct answers unnecessarily, or overtrust themselves and miss subtle cues in the question. Calibration matters because the exam environment amplifies emotion, and emotion can distort judgment. Good calibration is not about feeling confident all the time. It is about being accurate about what you know and what you do not know, so you can make smart choices quickly. A well-calibrated learner can say, "This is a question I can answer directly," or "This is a question where I need to slow down and verify details," or "This is a question where I should eliminate options and make the best choice without obsessing." That ability keeps you moving, and momentum protects you from spiraling. When your confidence is calibrated, the exam feels like a sequence of decisions rather than a series of threats. To calibrate confidence, you need feedback from practice that is honest and specific, not just a feeling that you studied a lot. The best feedback comes from answering questions or prompts without looking at notes, then checking yourself and analyzing why you were right or wrong. When you get something wrong, the key is not to shame yourself, but to identify what kind of error it was. Sometimes the error is a knowledge gap, meaning you truly did not know the concept. Sometimes the error is a confusion error, meaning you mixed up two similar ideas. Sometimes the error is a reading error, meaning you missed a key word like best, most likely, or primarily. Sometimes the error is a confidence error, meaning you knew the right answer but changed it because you doubted yourself. Each error type suggests a different fix, and calibration improves when you respond with the right fix instead of repeating the same study behavior. Over time, you start to predict your own error patterns, and prediction is the beginning of control. As you do this, it helps to pay attention to the cues that signal you are drifting into unhelpful confidence extremes. Overconfidence often shows up as answering too quickly and not checking whether the question is asking for a principle, a process step, or a best next action. Underconfidence often shows up as rereading the question repeatedly, imagining trickery, and searching memory for perfect certainty when a good decision is available. Neither extreme is stable, and both can cost points. A calibrated approach uses a steady method. Understand what the question is really testing, connect it to the correct concept family, eliminate clearly wrong options, and then choose the best remaining option with a calm commitment. When you practice this method repeatedly, you build a decision habit, and habits hold up under stress better than raw effort. This is why final review should include decision practice, not just content review, because content alone does not teach your brain how to perform. Performance is its own skill. Focus also requires managing your attention environment, because distraction is not only annoying, it is memory poison right before an exam. When you switch tasks frequently, your brain spends energy reloading context, and that reduces how much learning and recall strengthening you get from the same time investment. A final review period should be structured so that your mind can settle into one topic long enough to build solid cues and close real gaps. This does not mean marathon sessions that exhaust you, but it does mean fewer interruptions and fewer simultaneous goals. It also means being careful with last-minute new resources, because new resources often introduce new terminology and new framing that can destabilize what you already know. The best final review feels like sharpening, where you repeatedly pull the blade across the stone in the same direction. If you keep changing stones, you do not sharpen faster, you just create noise. Quiet repetition of the right kind is what creates reliable recall. When you revisit content during final review, the most productive approach is to chase understanding depth, not coverage breadth. Depth means you can connect a concept to its purpose, its trade-offs, and its neighboring concepts, which makes exam questions easier because you can reason even when wording changes. Breadth without depth can feel like you covered everything, but it often leads to fragile recognition that breaks when the question is framed differently. Depth also helps you avoid being trapped by distractor answers that sound familiar but do not fit the question's intent. If you understand that a roadmap sequences initiatives based on dependencies and capacity, you will not be fooled by an option that sounds like a roadmap but is really a random wish list. If you understand that outcome metrics steer decisions, you will not confuse a report of activity with proof of impact. This reasoning ability is what you want at the end because it turns knowledge into flexibility. Flexibility is how you stay calm when you see a question that looks unfamiliar on the surface. Retrieval cues become even stronger when you tie them to common question shapes you expect to see. Many questions describe a situation where a program is stuck, and you are asked what would most improve it. Others describe conflicting priorities and ask which choice best balances risk and mission. Others describe inconsistent behavior and ask what governance mechanism is missing, such as ownership clarity or review cadence. When you notice these shapes, you can preload a cue that says this is about sequencing, or this is about adoption and friction, or this is about measurement and pivots. The cue does not answer the question for you, but it points you to the correct mental toolbox. That reduces cognitive load, which is the mental effort required to process the question, and lower cognitive load means fewer mistakes. This is also why you should practice with varied phrasing, because varied phrasing forces you to rely on meaning rather than memorized wording. Meaning-based recall is stable, and stability is what you are building right now. A final review should also include confidence drills where you practice committing to an answer and moving on without second-guessing yourself unnecessarily. This is not about rushing. It is about preventing the pattern where you know the answer. Choose it, then talk yourself out of it because another option sounds sophisticated. A good way to do this mentally is to articulate a brief reason for your choice before moving on, because that reason anchors your decision in logic rather than in emotion. If you cannot articulate a reason, that is a signal to slow down and recheck the question, not a signal to panic. Over time, this habit trains you to trust your reasoning process, which is more reliable than your feelings. When learners lose points late in an exam, it is often because fatigue makes them doubt themselves and start changing answers randomly. Calibration practice protects you from that because it teaches you to treat doubt as information, not as a command. Doubt can tell you to verify, but it should not automatically tell you to switch. As the exam gets closer, the ideal mental state is alert, not frantic, and confident, not arrogant. That state comes from knowing what your strongest areas are, knowing what your weakest areas are, and knowing what you will do when you encounter a hard question. If you know you tend to overthink, you plan to use elimination and commit. If you know you tend to answer too fast, you plan to pause and identify the question's true intent. This is part of calibration because it turns self-awareness into strategy. It also helps to remember that not every question is designed to feel comfortable, and discomfort does not necessarily mean you are failing. Sometimes discomfort simply means the question is testing your ability to apply a concept rather than recite it. When you accept that, you stop interpreting challenge as danger, and you start treating it as a normal part of performance. That emotional shift is a real advantage because it keeps your working memory available for reasoning rather than being consumed by worry. As you bring everything together, the final review is really about building a reliable system inside your head. Focus protects your attention, retrieval cues speed up recall, and confidence calibration stabilizes decision-making. When these three work together, you can read a question, recognize what it is truly asking, pull the correct concept family into place, and choose an answer without spiraling. You are not trying to become perfect in the final days. You are trying to become consistent, because consistency is what produces a strong score. You should also recognize that the exam is a finite event, and your job is to deliver your current best performance, not to solve every possible security problem in the world. A calm, deliberate final review makes that possible by reducing noise and strengthening the pathways that already exist. When you walk into the exam with a small set of strong cues, a steady decision method, and a realistic sense of your own confidence, you have done the most important work. The rest is simply execution.
Thanks for listening. For more audio courses, daily newsletters, and more, please visit baremetalcyber.com.